Really happy to be with you from the another end of the world, from the Balkans, and I hope we will start a fruitful conversation. I'm gonna speak in English, in my migrants' English, as I always used to say. All the work that I do internationally is in migrants' English, not in the Queen's English, which we have appropriated and is our vernacular now. So, but if you have questions, please, or something doesn't come through, please write it in the chat and I'll try my best to clarify. Okay, so I thought I should share because we're going to talk a little bit about images and seeing. I should share some images. So I'll do it the old-fashioned way. I'll share some slides. So please let me know also if this works, because sometimes it's a little bit glitchy. So I'll try to talk for 30, 40 minutes, and that means probably 45, about seeing and about perception as a historical thing, a thing that is created and is produced beyond our consciousness. And as I said to Marcela previously, I'm not gonna throw you straight into the Balkan madness, into the what I see and we see here, but we're gonna try to go through what I think we share, probably beyond our differences, beyond good and evil, or mostly evil, namely colonial seeing. And we're gonna try to do this very shortly so that we can focus on the more, let's say, positive or healing um, aspects. So let me see now if this works. All right. So if it changed the slide, basically my whole effort starts, from I think, a very common situation, which is the lack of words or missing words, a situation of trying to deal with wounds, with anger, but also with apathy and indifference, also with cruelty. And in dealing with different communities and people coming from radically different trajectories, um, and trying to build either a dialogue or, for my more activist part, coalitions, right? And I am indeed inspired by my former teacher, Maria Lugones, and this practical principle of overcoming separation without distortion, which would mean simply that as we get to know each other's struggles, understanding the other should not come right with its own dose of violence, right? Distorting the other's complex world. So in order for that to take a sort of a practical dimension, for me, in my practice, this is the principle of meeting at the horizon, which I guess is what we are doing right now. So not by territorial invasion, and there is no need to look for the more authentic truth to be learned, but to meet at the horizon. And I give here the examples of the obelisk and the pyramid as optical instruments that are crossing the horizon and uniting the sky and the land, and that are sending across the message that, over the horizon, of a sense of the whole world. And this idea, the sense of the world that each of us have, that world doesn't need to be global. So, however, our own senses and education is already being, let's say, populated by a sense of the world which comes from the history of modernity. This image is very familiar probably for many of us, is the blue marble taken from the space by US astronauts in 72. And right, it's a groundless image. It's an image of the whole world, from which what has disappeared is precisely the horizon. The horizon is kind of uh, turns into the line of the whole world, but it disappears from our own sense of the world, right? Our own sense of the world depends on seeing the horizon. And here, the horizon is exactly what disappears in this modern image. Now, this modern image comes from a history of modern images that is connected to colonialism and to a production of images about the world, about the sense of the world that started 500 years ago, about 500 years ago. This is the very first map of what they believe to be the whole world, right? From 1507, the Waldense map, where you could see what they thought America was at that point. And this projection in quadrants, in this 4 by 3 squares, will then be the basis of the projection, which is familiar, I guess, to all of us through the modern map of the so-called whole world that is so familiar to our seeing, right? Now, I'm gonna make a different projection. Because I'm speaking from a different corner of the world. So I turned the world thanks to the wonders of technology and centered it on my exact location right now, which is in Bucharest, in Romania, by the Balkans, close to the Black Sea. I'll give you an image that of orientation about to understand a little bit more about my sense of the world. But this image is not from our present, and maybe you'll understand later better why. You see here an image for just about 100 years ago, when Romania was caught in between three empires, right? From the west, the Austrian Empire, from the east, the Russian Empire, and from the south, the Ottoman Empire. So all these three empires had to die in order for the Balkans to rise up. And I guess this is the present from which I'm speaking you. Now, when I'm saying that the sense of the world, when we say it doesn't need to be global, I'm referring to this particular situation as an example. This is the Black Sea. To the left of the image, you see Romania. To the south, Turkey. To the east, Russia, and to the north of it, Ukraine, right? Well, if in Romania, by the seaport of Constanța, to the left of the Black Sea, the sun sets on the sea and rises on the land. On the eastern part in Georgia, in Sochi, the sun sets on the land and rises from the sea. The other way around, right? So one sea, one little sea, is enough to create the experience of a whole world where the sun seemingly goes around it. Yeah. So obviously, in the different cultures that lived throughout these territories, that was enough to create the sense of a whole world. And my feeling is that this experience, very different sense of the world, is let's say similar for different nations and peoples around the world, so that our world is a multitude of senses of the world that have each with its own complexity, right? And so we are basically plunging into deep waters. But the waters themselves let's say, different. Here I'm showing you a few images from the Balkans and from Romania. There are three types of water. To the left, it's an ancient fountain of salt water used for healing and for pickling. In the middle is the horizon of the Black Sea seen from the sea. And to the right, hidden beneath the bushes, is actually a spring of mineral water that you can drink from, and is also used for healing and for alleviating thirst, of course. So let's say that these are three very different sources of my grounding in this sense of the world and of my sensorial, what I open to you as my sensorial familiarity, right? Uh, the image of the, let's say, to bring even more familiarity, the image that I would like you to retain, in the sense of my location, is perhaps this one. Uh, Comfort food is what Balkans is all about. And here you can see on the upper left of the image the polenta, and you can see in the lower right of the image corn being planted in with the backyard of basically each rural house in Romania, which shows how our bodies, our histories have been weaved and have been made together in this history of 500 years, because the corn, of course, has been brought by the colonial powers to Europe and then has become a staple of subsistence for East Europeans who were at that time reduced to serfdom. So the corn connects the Eastern Europe and the Mesoamerica throughout all these centuries, and they form part of our common history, although a less visible history, right? So this is why when I approach such complex matters, I like to ask, well, this weird question, but philosophy tends to ask weird questions. Where are you when you think? You know, we might say at home, but then maybe at home is the place to just rest and just have some quiet time. At work, no, because work perhaps is just for work, for becoming, working machine. In vacation, yes, but perhaps in vacation is just time for relaxing. So then where are we when we think? Where are you when you think? Implicitly, very often the case is that the place of thinking, even within a lot of our students or us even, is the center, an imaginary center of all knowledge of science, which has taken the geography and shape of Europe or the United States, the West. Or this center of thought is modernity. Another place of the thought is self-consciousness, the sovereign ego. And here, I guess, is where we are gonna kind of try to undo the unitary uh, ego. Well, from my sensibility with what I shown you, it is only honest from me to tell you up front that, well, I see the thought that is pronounced and affirmed from the center of Europe, or from the centers of modernity, as not as much as gain, or as a triumph of humanity, as a defeat of the relational self, that has come from a long history of the privatization of organs, with the production of obedient bodies and normalization of perception. And this is the part of the history that, let's say, the darker side of the history of modernity that I see from my location. So that actually the thought, the rational thought of the triumph of modernity, I see it as being pronounced. The place where it is pronounced from are these rarefied spaces that include the campus, the laboratory, the hospital, the prison, the mall, the cinema, the hotel lobby, all these places that have been cleaned up of external residues. Think of how a movie set that is, let's say, situated in the, I don't know, 1900s is cleaned up of any kind of contemporary, uh, visibilities, like a watch. It shouldn't be there. And then the other question is not where, but when are you when you think? And this is very, very important for me because, well, you see, we live I think we do live in a multiplicity of historical times, but we do share this privatized world history that we can recite, and I think uh, people, school the children all over the modernized world are able to recite and forms a sort of like a spine of the understanding of the sense of the world, um, and of the sense of the time of the modern world. And it's this projection that, well, first of all, splits the time between antiquity, Middle Ages, and the modern age. And then the modern age goes through these quick things that I put there, very often bypassing the transatlantic slave trade or other events, bypassing resistances, bypassing revolutions. So that, for instance, the Haitian Revolution is never part of the curriculum. And then seemingly going into a contemporariness that is defined not as much by historical events as by, let's say, cultural events. So, the generation that has looked at the Friends, or the generation that has been at, when The Wire was being broadcast, or the generation of Breaking Bad, and so on. So a sense of measuring time that passes seamlessly from history to the fiction of history, right? So, for instance, as we connect in our present, right, this present of our days is filled with a history of the world dominated by a canal, a very short canal, and by a smaller force that opposes a greater force. And this is obviously what happens also in these three images that I showed you, which belong obviously to a similar event that happened just a few years ago, because this is stories about the Suez Canal. And as you see on the right side of the image, this is the projection of the first global circuit of commodities made possible by the Suez Canal, using the same Mercator projection of the world map. And under it's the little machines that are trying to move the Evergrande container ship. So the histories that create our present are already a multiplicity, like this, the similarity between the formal similarity between this and what happens today, uh, you know, makes it hard makes it necessary to ask this weird question: when are we when we think? And I brought to your attention this very helpful scheme because this represents, right, sort of like the arrow of time in the most simple uh, projection, which is a modern projection, the time that goes from past to future, and basically that's it. Well, I would like to propose you this other politics of temporality, of seeding the future. And seeding the future always goes through the past. In this image, I refer to the late 70s, right? That, let's say, it has plunged us into the present neoliberal paradigm. So we go back and forth between the present and the 70s on those dotted lines until we form a seed fat enough to create, to seed the future, to seed how this can take an end and then bring shape to shape uh, a new time, right? So seeding the fat seeds of the future is a principle of work. And this repeated return to crucial moments in the past, I think it's a rewarding method, as probably you know. I'll go beyond this one just to signal that um, what this what I'm trying to do is reorienting sensibilities, right? That's the basic line, and this, of course, comes from living experience. I try to show you a little bit of my location, a little bit of our common present, which is not so common, can be murky to identify where and when, the where and the when, and then we'll see about the who. But these are some of the questions that kept on preoccupying me over the time. Um, and we will see how they are relevant. So, what we get into it now is the hanging guy, this issue of the hanging guy. After, I hope we have a little bit of familiarity now with where I'm coming from. Um, and this image of the top of the pyramid with the all-seeing eye, of course, it's very familiar to you, but I won't be talking about the treasury or the conspiracy or all that. But to draw attention about to this idea of seeing as being produced in modernity just as much as the sense of the world and just as much as uh, yeah, modern ideologies. And so there's three big tenets that are helpful here, which are also three ways of saying no to the, let's say, colonial history. And these like our bodies are not made in one generation, our seeing is not complete, and our self is not a unit. And we're only gonna talk about the second a little bit today. But just to keep to have an inkling about what I'm talking about. Uh, of course, our bodies are not made into a generation because we all have, bodily and facial features across generations that we recognize, ways of smiling that we recognize across generations, postures, ways of walking, and then all the level of visceral reactions, inherited sensibilities, reflexes, and then, of course, liver conditions, heart conditions that are transmitted through generations and generations that have been exposed to all kinds of conditions, right? Then about seeing not being complete, well, the language that I use is of regimes of visibility, of that which is visible in a unitary form, and then of technologies of representations and platforms for seeing. And I think it's going to become much easier in just a while. So, very shortly, I'll go through this. The technologies of representation, basically, and the regimes of visibility. Um, we started with this a sense of the world produced through the Mercator map, the blue marble image of the earth, and the globe, that image that is familiar to us. And for me, this all belongs to the regime of the modern image. And even though this modern image, the main technologies have been invented in the Arab Enlightenment. This is the camera obscura of Al-Khattam in the 11th century. The role of the image has taken a very particular prominence in the economy of cultural materialities in the Western civilization. So the image is very heavy in the Western civilization, very powerful. It matters a lot over all the other cultural materialities. And so that the way this image, technical image, was produced is a history that is not often told. And the I'm showing you here the technique of producing, a realist image by Albrecht Dürer in the 1500s by using this mathematical grid that would split, right, a frame into squares, just like the Mercator projection of the world, by the way. And then, he would copy what he would see in each square on the projection on his desk, right? So basically, what happens here, if you look, is that he's not looking at the model, which is on the left side of the screen, right? What he's looking at is at the grid, right? So in this act, you know, the painter is separating his own gaze, his own seeing from the model, from the world out there. Basically, the act of seeing is stopping at the image, at the grid, right? This is where he looks at the grid. And imagine that beyond the grid is the whole world, right? Well, in a nutshell, I think this is what happens with in the history of modernity, where as the modern image takes over, it creates a way of separating seeing itself from the world. Now, this act is able to produce exquisite images that are, right, very realistic, very seducing, like this image of the souls of a praying man, also painted by Dürer with that technique, right? Now, I'm not going to go through the whole genealogy of 4 centuries of modern technical images, but your intuition already knows where I'm going with this. And you see the projection room, the cinema room, even the modern television set in a home, no matter how poor or rich, the same setup. And then, of course, the age of smart screens and selfies and yeah, screens everywhere. And then I'm just gonna let you a little bit stop and contemplate this image, right? Of the observation deck on the 86th floor of the Empire State Building. And what I find really striking here, right, is that we see the modern subject, right? After all these 400 years of production of the modern image, uh, all trying to elevate, to find a platform which is really, really high up, so high up that maybe, they would be able to see the whole world, right? And to get themselves up there and see something, right? But what happens if you look is that it looks eerily similar with the prison. It's all enclosed by iron bars, and then what exactly are they seeing? They are all looking, you see, not directly at the world. They are looking just like that painter 500 years ago at their screens, right? The act of seeing is stuck into the image, into the technical image, and it doesn't reach anymore the world, let alone the other. The act of seeing is caught into this bubble of the technical image, so that basically it stops being an act seeing, and it simply becomes one with the image. Okay. The result is, well, a disembodied eye. And here we mark the return to that image of the dollar with the all-seeing eye. The all-seeing eye is not all-seeing. It's simply an impoverished subject that has been, reduced from a full body with five senses and memory and everything to a disembodied eye that takes over the experience of the world and the way the sense of the world makes or not sense for the perceiving subject itself. The disembodied I not only accidentally has arms and legs, is what modern cultural institutions are making you become as you visit, for instance, the large museums of the world where you are going through endless corridors and rooms with let's say paintings, and basically you are not allowed to touch it. You have to ignore your sense of smell. You have to ignore the sense of tiredness that you might feel after walking, you know, sweeping through your body. And you have to become an eye that just sees what has to be seen, right? Now, of course, this is not only the experience of the modern cultural institutions, but is more nefariously the experience of power, of the way institutions are, and let's say dominant institutions are created as a form of trying to see everything and to become this disembodied I. So, um, very shortly, and here we kind of intersect with a different stream of thought. The modern image has produced and keeps on producing a normalization of perception, whether it's the grid that the painter sees or the landscape of, the skyline of New York or the image of the blue marble. That's a normalized perception that goes, it becomes familiar beyond the beneath consciousness, right? So it sweeps through perception, through sensorial perception, into our mind and into our senses of the world. Uh, and it creates this subject that is stuck into the image, right? Now, here is where we leap into this other stream of thought. When Freud was writing about narcissism, it was on the eve of World War One, right? And for his part, he defined it as the libido that has been withdrawn from the external world and has been directed to the ego, right? So he talks about a logic of separation, just like indeed the but we see that with the history of the modern image, the logic of separation is wider. It's more encompassing, right? Nevertheless, Freud does talk about a separation of this modern subject from the world. And I would propose to you that this separation is, well, it is the root of the narcissistic self, not as an exception, but as the prototype subjectivity of the modern society, right? And that uh, this narcissistic self has a cultural environment, let's put it this way, that in which it thrives or that maintains its reproduction. This is the regime of visibility of the modern image, which is the mirror in which the narcissistic self keeps on getting lost or is stuck, right? So why is this bad? You give me the answers. You know much better. But I would draw your attention just to this one aspect that, well, narcissism is the parasite of emancipation, right? That whenever, I understand emancipation also from the history of my region, right? So basically, it's history of struggle that is victorious insofar as, the peasants liberated themselves and then tried to impose their own philosophy of the good life, right? So, of course, there's other meanings of emancipation. Uh, Emancipation as having self-education, as having some rights, all that. But regardless of uh, the sense of emancipation that one uses, narcissism attacks it or twists it by extracting the essence of pure power after the struggle of liberation. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be a big gain, even a minor gain can be subject to the narcissistic extraction. And in this process, uh, what makes this process reproduce at the level of a culture is this connection to the technical image of the disembodied I, yeah, that is already there available. So, and then, of course, in the name of emancipation, when narcissism takes over, becomes a source of both outward and in violence and internal self-destruction. Now, uh, how does this relate then? What is to be done with this? And how does this relate to this history of the modern image and of the normalization of perception? Uh, so basically, again, we are talking about a normalization of perception that creates this, let's say, little monster, so that the, let's say, the primary narcissistic drive, which is useful for survival, is dilated and becomes this inflated ego that then becomes the norm of actually of the modern society, right? So for his part, Freud proposed two ends of narcissism, and yeah, although okay, we'll go on this line of thought, just because he one of the ends of narcissism that he proposed is idealization, right? And well, this is, I think, very often the case in society. And then here, the regime of visibility of the modern image is very adequate to providing the nourishment for this type of attachment in separation. Um, And very interestingly, it connects to this series of affects that are simulating attachment but in separation. So sentimentalism, infatuation, dogmatic faith, obsession, addiction, bad faith, and power tripping. Now, one path out of idealization is de-idealization, which is the action taken to diminish this aggrandized object, right? And we've seen, the idealization, the way the idealization, the role idealization plays in the Western culture industry, especially through the figure of the stars, right? Of movie stars, but not only, right? Which is a very peculiar type of central figure of a cultural environment, the celebrity or the star. So that's clearly an aggrandized subject, right? And often we see the violence of de-idealization when instead radical criticism is mistaken for de-idealization, which is also a violent action, right? That is, I think, also very familiar. Now, what is to be done in out of this crux? And I'm getting close to my final remark, if you are worried. Well, I mean, this act of separating the act of seeing, from the image of coupling, the act of seeing into the image that makes the act of seeing be something that doesn't have an ethics, right? It's not an act anymore. It's not an action seeing. So then if it's not an action, then we can be free of attaching an ethics to it, right? And this is the problem. Now, you know, uh, the Latin poet Ovid talked about the myth of Acteon and which is kind of useful to understand the roots of this separation between the ethical and the non-ethical gaze. So you have this hunter, Acteon, who goes onto a hunt and into the forest, and he hears some sounds, and then instead of being discreet, he rushes through and surprises the goddess Diana in her secret grove, bathing in the nude, right? To which Diana punishes him and turns him into a stag, which is then eaten by his own hunting dogs because they don't recognize the smell, right? So Actaeon is killed in this metamorphosis because he touched with his gaze the goddess of the forest, right? So he discovered her. And I would argue that, in this history of the modern image of 500 years, about all modern discoveries are proceeding in the same way through a violence that is unspoken, targeting a so-called virginal sight, something that will be seen for the first time. So aiming for the conquest of a terra nullius, repeating the gesture of ad infinitum, the gesture of Columbus landing in the Americas in 1492, right? And this gesture of acquiring knowledge by way of discovery um, has been repeated, I think, throughout the modernity and keeps on being repeated today in so much that knowledge is somehow separated from ethics. And this separation, again, it's a production. It's not something that is uh, uh, specific to all cultures of the world. On the contrary, it's a gaze that is separated from ethics is a rarity. It's actually a very peculiar thing. And the act of seeing is most often in different cultures accompanied by either by rituals, by procedures, implicit or formal, informal or not, but with an ethics nonetheless. So the thought, which the self, the narcissistic self, that has this thought that gets stuck into and relies on the technical image, mistakes the act of seeing for the image itself, right? And thus becomes ethics free, able to commit any kind of violence, right? Uh, becomes beyond any ethical norm, right? Ready to do violence, predisposed to violence. But it is also, it's not only the violence, external violence of a hurting subject, but also the violence of a subject, well, that turns the hurt onto its own self, a sub in very different forms, right? Subject who is anti-relational, that tends to be obsessive or sentimental, you know, or apathic, those forms of affects. Uh, Always looking for, in the lookout for new discoveries, for new images, for experiences, what has not been experienced, you know, driven by FOMO, and thus permanently reenacting the transgression of acteon, right? This rushing into the image, rushing into seeing everything. Um, okay, this is a painting of Diana and Acteon that also is about 500 years old. Uh, And, you know, of course, the male painter Tizian chose to show actually the act of disrobing. So the violent gaze, right? So Acteon actually rushing in and surprising Diana. So, you know, from all the whole story written by Ovid, Tizian didn't choose to show here the killing of Acteon by Diana, you know, the punishment enacted by the goddess for his transgression. So it is interesting, right, that at the beginning of Western modern civilization, you see this choice being made right here from all that story, cautionary tale, to keep on projecting this violent gaze, this disrobing gaze, right? That is devoid of ethics, and on the contrary, is looking to disrobe, to touch land on unseen sights. And well, I mean, the ends of this gaze that is rushing forward are always in self-destruction, right? This Acteon turns into a stag and then gets lost in a very small puddle, caught into the reflection of its own self, and drowns in the right. Narcissus drowns into a very small puddle, not into a big ocean. So uh, to bring all to sort of like an end, um, I think we do live in a world where, in a modern world, where we enact, we seeing, we make the choice of seeing, but the predominant gesture of the gaze is that is devoid of any ethics, is normalized all around us, right? Uh, And this gaze that discovers and disrobes on the background of a generalizing act of violence uh, is actually the, let's say, the surrounding normalcy that has been normalized through this history of normalizing perception. But what if this is easy to, or is relatively easy to understand, what is harder that it's in this process, thought itself gets stuck. It's relatively easy to understand the violence because what violence does. But what is harder to point is that thought itself along that violence gets stuck as it gets captured by the modern image. It gets stuck and doesn't reach the world, right? Doesn't connect anymore to the world. Now, and this is the other end. Besides idealization, which was this unfortunate end of narcissism that Freud thought would be an end, and it is, but you know, not the best. He talked very briefly also about a different type of ends of narcissism brought through sublimation. And sublimation, he defined it as, well, the instinct directing itself towards a different aim than of sexual satisfaction, but without involving repression, right? And in connection to this long history of the modern image that I shared, I would say that um, the chance of ending narcissism humanly uh, in our everyday life is made bigger indeed by sublimation. If we understand by sublimation this not an escape, it's a bit of a balancing act here. It's not an escape into a completely different world, but into, let's say, a smaller world that nevertheless keeps its original complexity, remains, like I showed you at the beginning, that little C that was able to create a sense of the whole world. It retains its original complexity, right? It remains a world, right? So in sublimation, one withdraws from this normalized perception and captured sense of the world into perhaps a communal world, a world that has its own complexity and is grounded in the presence of others. The point is to find that other smaller world. And of course, the culture of the repressed is full actually of examples of such smaller worlds that give us ends of narcissism and are able to rebuild the connection to the world. The carnival, the festival, solemn celebrations are full of acts of ethical seeing, or at least acts in which seeing is take considered an action and not just an image, and is accompanied then with a sociality with that then itself is swept into to different kind of cultural traditions, right? Yeah, I will stop here, I think, and um, yeah, and then let's talk a little bit.